Is this your first time on a base, old-timer? The voice was sharp, laced with an arrogant amusement that cut through the low hum of the mess hall. Captain Evans, his captain's bars gleaming under the fluorescent lights, smirked down at the old man sitting alone. "You look a little lost." Philip Bradford, 84 years old, didn't look up from his coffee. He swirled the dark liquid in the thick ceramic mug, his hand gnarled but steady. His eyes, the color of a faded sky, remained fixed on the small vortex he created. The captain, flanked by two younger lieutenants, eager to mirror his confidence, exchanged an impatient glance. "I'm talking to you, Tyson," Evans pressed, his voice a little louder now, drawing the attention of a few nearby tables. "This area is for active duty personnel. Let me see some identification." He said it with the casual authority of someone who had never been truly challenged. He wore his uniform like a costume of importance, a shield of rank that made him feel 10 foot tall. The mess hall was alive with the usual Tuesday afternoon chaos, trays clattering against stainless steel counters, chairs scraping across worn linoleum, the drone of 100 conversations about deployment schedules and weekend liberty plans. But around Philip's corner table, something was changing. The noise didn't disappear, but it softened, muffled, as if a bubble of tension was forming round the two men. Young airmen nearby slowed their chewing, forks hovering between plate and mouth, sensing that something was unfolding, something uncomfortable that didn't belong in the mundane rhythm of a weekday lunch. Evans felt the shift too, and it fed him. He was performing now, and he had an audience. The silence spread like spilled water, creeping from table to table in widening circles. Conversations stuttered and died. A fork clinked against a plate, and the sound seemed unnaturally loud in the thickening quiet. The two lieutenants behind Evans exchanged glances, their initial amusement curdling into something that tasted like unease. They'd seen the captain like this before, puffed up and eager to assert dominance, but never against someone so clearly undeserving of it. An old man, a civilian, someone's grandfather. Still, Philip said nothing. His silence wasn't passive. It was a presence, a wall that Evans kept throwing himself against, and each time he bounced back more frustrated than before. The captain felt the eyes on him now, dozens of them, watching, judging, waiting to see what he'd do next. He couldn't back down. To walk away now would be to admit he'd picked a fight with someone who wouldn't fight back, and that would make him look weak, foolish. So he leaned forward, planted his palms flat on the table with enough force to make the coffee cup jump and slosh dark liquid onto the pale formica surface. "ID now," Evans snapped, his voice stripped of its earlier mockery, replaced by hard command. "Or I'll have security forces escort you to the front gate and you can explain yourself to them instead." Philip finally moved, slowly with the deliberate care of someone who'd learned long ago that speed was rarely necessary. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn red leather jacket. The jacket looked like it had stories sewn into every crack and fade, like it had seen things that would make a younger man's uniform look like dress-up clothes. He withdrew a simple bifold wallet, cracked at the corners, the leather soft with decades of handling. From it, he produced a laminated card, its edges rounded and dulled by time, the photo showing a man with the same steady eyes, but fewer years behind them. He placed it on the table without ceremony, without explanation, and returned his hand to his coffee mug. Evans snatched it up like a prize. He held it to the light, squinting at it with theatrical scrutiny, turning it over as if checking for forgery. "Retired," he read aloud, his voice dripping with satisfaction and disdain. "Of course you are. Came back for the taxpayer-funded meal, did you? Reliving the glory days?" He tossed the card back onto the table where it skittered across the wet surface and came to rest against the salt shaker. Behind him, one of the lieutenants let out a short, nervous laugh that sounded more like a cough. Evans wasn't done. His eyes, emboldened by what he perceived as victory, roamed over Philip's simple civilian clothes, the comfortable slacks, the plain collared shirt, the ancient jacket. Then his gaze snagged on something small pinned to the jacket's lapel, a silver device unpolished and dark with tarnish, so understated it was almost invisible. "What's this little trinket?" Evans asked, his voice syrupy with condescension. He reached out and with a sharp flick of his fingernail against the metal, produced a clear, ringing tink that echoed in the unnatural quiet. Did you pick this up at a surplus store? A souvenir to make you feel important? The line had been crossed. What had been uncomfortable was now something else entirely, something darker. At a table near the back wall, partially obscured by a support column, Airman First Class Sarah Miller felt her stomach turn. She'd been watching the scene unfold with growing discomfort, the kind that makes your skin feel too tight and your hands curl into fists under the table. She knew Captain Evans by reputation. The man was a walking Napoleon complex, always eager to remind people of his authority, especially people who couldn't push back. But this felt different. This wasn't just bureaucratic posturing or petty power games. This was cruelty, plain and simple, directed at an old man whose only crime was sitting quietly with his coffee. The old man reminded her of her grandfather, Papa Joe, who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam and never talked about it except in fragments, late at night, when he thought no one was listening. Papa Joe had that same quality, that unshakable calm that came from having survived things that would break other men. She'd learned early that quiet men were often the strongest ones, that silence could be a kind of strength that loud people would never understand. She watched Evans flick the pin, heard the sharp metallic sound cut through the silence, and something in her chest tightened like a fist. She couldn't confront a captain directly. That would be career suicide, an airman first class challenging an officer in public. The chain of command was sacred, drilled into her from day one of basic training. But her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, something he'd told her the day she left for the Air Force. There's always a right way to do the right thing, Sarah. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's quiet, but there's always a way. She made her decision. Keeping her movements small and deliberate, she slid her phone from her pocket and held it below the edge of the table, out of sight. Her thumbs moved quickly across the screen, navigating to the base directory. She found the number for the 12th Air Wing Command Section and pressed dial, lifting the phone to her ear as she turned her body slightly away from the drama at the center of the room. A professional voice answered on the second ring. 12th Air Wing Command, Staff Sergeant Davis speaking. Sergeant, Sarah whispered, keeping her voice low and urgent. This is Airman Miller calling from Falcon's Landing Mess Hall. We have a situation. Go ahead, Airman. What's the nature of the situation? It's Captain Evans from Logistics. He's publicly harassing an elderly veteran, sir. It's escalating. He's threatening to have the man arrested. There was a pause, the sound of a chair creaking as Davis sat forward. Can you identify the veteran? Sarah squinted toward Philip's table. The ID card was still lying there, face up near the salt shaker, but the angle was wrong and the distance too great. She couldn't make out the name. Stand by, Sergeant, she murmured. She stood up, stretching as if working out a kink in her back, and started walking toward the drink station. Her path took her past Philip's table, close enough that she could glance down without being obvious. The faded text on the laminated card came into focus for just a moment. Bradford, Philip, service number. The word retired stamped in red. She kept walking, didn't break stride, and when she was several paces past, she brought the phone back to her mouth. Sergeant, she breathed, the name on the ID is Bradford. Philip Bradford. The silence on the other end of the line wasn't just a pause. It was a void, a held breath, a moment of pure shock. When Staff Sergeant Davis spoke again, his voice had changed completely. The casual professionalism was gone, replaced by something clipped, urgent, and very, very serious. Airman Miller, he said, each word precise as a knife cut. Say that name again. Spell it for me. Now. Bradford, Sarah whispered, her pulse hammering in her ears. Philip? She heard the rapid clatter of keyboard keys, then a sharp intake of breath. Oh God, Davis breathed, and it sounded like a prayer. Airmen, listen to me very carefully. Stay on this line, but do not engage. Do not approach the captain. Do not intervene. Help is coming. Do you understand? Yes, Sergeant. Good. Don't hang up. The line stayed open, but she could hear Davis shouting to someone else in the office, his voice muffled but audible. Get Colonel Jensen, right now. I don't care if she's in a meeting. Get her on the line immediately. Tell her it's about Philip Bradford. 3 floors above the mess hall, in the wood-paneled wing commander's office, Colonel Ann Jensen was deep into a quarterly budget review. Charts projected on the wall showed funding shortfalls in maintenance and operations. The air was thick with the tedious language of fiscal responsibility. She was making notes on a legal pad when her aide, Master Sergeant Rourke, burst through the door without knocking. The violation of protocol was so severe that every head in the room turned. "Colonel," Rourke said, his face pale and his voice tight, "I apologize for the interruption, ma'am, but you need to hear this immediately." Jensen fixed him with a look that could freeze helium. "Sergeant, this had better be a matter of national security." "Ma'am," Rourke said, stepping closer and lowering his voice, "we just received a call from the main mess hall. An officer is publicly harassing a visitor. The visitor's name is Philip Bradford." The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The color drained from Colonel Jensen's face as if someone had opened a valve. The pen in her hand dropped to the polished conference table with a sharp clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. She stood so abruptly that her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Where?" she demanded, her voice a whip crack of controlled fury. "Falcon's Landing, ma'am, main mess hall. It's happening right now." "Get my vehicle," Jensen snapped, already moving toward the door, grabbing her service cap from its stand. "Bring it to the front entrance. Do it now." She turned to the stunned officers still seated at the table. "This meeting is over. Dismissed." As Rourke scrambled to comply, she issued one more order, her voice carrying a note of barely controlled panic. "Contact the base chief. Tell him to meet me at the mess hall immediately. Tell him it's a Broken Arrow situation. He'll understand." Broken Arrow, the code they used for a crisis of institutional magnitude, the kind of emergency that could define careers or destroy them. For Colonel Jensen, the name Philip Bradford carried weight that few on this base could comprehend. He wasn't just a retired senior enlisted leader. He was a founding pillar of the modern Air Force, a living legend whose contributions had shaped the very institutions she served. And right now, someone under her command was desecrating that legacy in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. Back in the mess hall, Captain Evans, drunk on his own authority and blind to the tightening noose around his career, prepared to deliver his final blow. The disapproval in the room had become palpable, a physical pressure, but he interpreted it as validation. They were all watching him assert control, maintain standards, protect the integrity of the installation. He puffed out his chest and gestured toward the 2 security forces airmen standing near the entrance, who had been watching the scene with increasing discomfort. "All right, that's enough," Evans announced loudly, addressing the room at large. "This individual is clearly confused and represents a potential security risk." He pointed at Philip with rigid authority. "I want him removed from this installation immediately. Escort him off base and contact civilian authorities for a psychological evaluation. He's obviously not mentally competent to be on federal property." The gasps were audible now. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was an abuse of power so grotesque it made people physically recoil. The 2 security forces airmen began walking forward, their faces grim masks of professional duty at war with personal conscience. Their steps were slow, reluctant. The walk of men following an order they knew in their bones was wrong. They were 3 paces from Philip's table when the main doors of the mess hall exploded inward. The crash of metal against stoppers made everyone in the room flinch. The doors didn't swing open, they were thrown, and standing in the threshold, backlit by brilliant afternoon sun that created a halo effect, was Colonel Ann Jensen. Flanking her was the base chief master sergeant, his expression a thundercloud of barely restrained fury, and behind them a security detail of 4 armed airmen moving with lethal precision. The effect was seismic. The quiet that had been tense and uncomfortable became absolute, a vacuum of sound so complete it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Forks stopped midair. Trays were frozen in place. Every single person in that mess hall, from the newest airman basic to the civilian contractors working the serving line, became statues. Colonel Jensen's eyes swept the room with cold, surgical precision. Her gaze passed over the cowering lieutenants, the frozen security forces airmen, and landed on Captain Evans. She didn't acknowledge him. Her look was one of complete dismissal, as if he were furniture she had to navigate over and Daeshwa. Her entire party moved forward as one coordinated unit, their polished boots striking the floor in a synchronized rhythm that sounded like a drumbeat of judgment. They carved through the sea of tables and stunned onlookers with absolute purpose. Their trajectory aimed with laser precision at the small corner table, where an old man in a leather jacket sat watching them approach with ancient, knowing eyes. Captain Evans stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion, fear, and dawning horror as the wing commander, the single highest authority on the entire installation, marched past him as if he didn't exist. His world was tilting, sliding sideways, and he couldn't find his balance. Colonel Jensen stopped exactly 3 feet from Philip Bradford's chair. The Chief Master Sergeant halted at her shoulder, his posture rigid as iron. For a long moment, she simply looked at the old man, and her expression, which had been a mask of cold fury, softened into something else entirely. Reverence, pure, unmistakable reverence. Then, in a movement so crisp and precise it seemed to ring in the air, Colonel Jensen snapped to attention. She raised her right hand to her brow, fingers aligned perfectly, and rendered the sharpest, most respectful salute of her entire career. "Mr. Bradford," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall with crystal clarity. "On behalf of the entire 12th Air Wing, I want to apologize for the reception you have received today. It is an honor, sir, to have you on my base." The word "sir" hung in the air like electricity, paradigm shifting and absolute. The base chief snapped his own salute, his eyes locked on Philip with an expression that bordered on awe. Captain Evans' jaw went slack, his mind struggling desperately to process what he was seeing. A full bird colonel was saluting a man in civilian clothes. A colonel was calling him sir. It violated everything he understood about rank and protocol. It made no sense. Philip Bradford finally moved. He gave a slow, gentle nod, his weathered face showing the faintest hint of a sad smile. "At ease, Anne," he said. "Yamai-san," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the absolute silence. He knew her name. Colonel Jensen lowered her salute but remained at attention. Then she turned, not to Evans, but to address the entire population of the mess hall. Her voice took on the quality of a powerful lecture, each word chosen with precision. "For those of you who do not know," she began, her gaze sweeping across the sea of young, uncomprehending faces, "you are in the presence of a living legend. This is Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, retired Philip Bradford." The collective gasp that went through the room was like a wave breaking.